Well, I think millennials about these elemental questions are not very different from the rest of us. Like even old people like me, they are seduced into a false narrative that makes huge promises to them. And I hope that, like old people like me, they can grow in their awareness that there is a more excellent way. And there are many ways to articulate the more excellent way, but it has to be recognized that the more excellent way contradicts the dominant way and is terribly inconvenient. So I think I probably do not comprehend at all what's going on with millennials, so I admit that. But I also think that the elemental human questions are constant among us. And that is that a self-serving narrative is elementally destructive. And we don't have to live that way. So it is the myth of being self-sufficient, which already, was in the Tower of Babel. Build a tower and be which was probably phallic. So be self-sufficient. It won't work. We already know that. It won't work. So, we cannot secure ourselves. We can only be secured by someone who is faithful to us.
Well, one of the things, and maybe it's my generation, the one emotional, and this is what we've been wrestling with as a state of emotion, is not only atrophy, fatigue, but with the trauma that's come from being exposed to so much suffering outside of our neighborhoods, online.
Yep.
There comes a certain PTSD and a numbness that makes it almost unable to touch your own pain or your own sadness, your own lament about the way things are.
Yep. I've spent a lot of energy on the book of Psalms, and particularly the lament Psalms. And what I think happens in the lament Psalms is that the pain is brought to speech. And when pain is brought to speech, it turns to energy. If it is not brought to speech, it turns to despair. So if that simplistic little formulation is correct, then that means that the people who make a difference are the ones who bring the pain to speech.
I would say that the generation right now would just consume more media in hopes of satiating that sadness or that.
Yeah, and it won't work. It will not work. Yeah, right. In fact, I think that whether by intention or not, that whole electronic thing is a protection against honest speech.
I believe it.
Yeah, I think it's basically lament.
Lament.
I think lament is the breaking of numbness by the admission of pain and loss. If we don't stay close to our pain, then we cannot stay close to our neighbor's pain.
How do you live into that, though? If you have everything and you have the comfort and the security and a fullness of life, how do you evoke a certain dependency?
Well, you start by noticing neighbors, and then you ask, how can I transfer resources and energy in a way that will enhance the neighbor? It's inconvenient. Yeah, very inconvenient. And there's a rabbinic story about leaving Egypt, that when Moses got to the Red Sea, the waters had not parted. He put his foot into the water and it parted that far. And then he took another step and it parted that far. So the requirement is you have to put your foot in the water, and then you are delivered that far. I think people need to go where they're at, and if they find a neighbor, they need to do that and see what follows that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But the key point is really switching narratives. I think that's what the Bible means by conversion. To be converted to a more adequate narrative account of reality. See, if you ask most people how they characterize God, I mean, they may not know the words. What they would want to say is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. And those are not Israel's categories. Israel's categories are faith, justice, mercy. They're all relational terms. So this God has bet everything on relationships, and this God intends us to bet everything on relationships, which flies in the face of technological mastery, monetary control, scientific know-how, all of that. That doesn't mean those aren't useful, but they cannot give an account of things ultimate.
Would you argue that relationships are more important than achievements?
Yes.
Wow.
Which is very countercultural, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think what we have to do is to trace out the narrative that legitimates what has happened to the American dream. And that narrative is based on power, race, class, all that. And then we have to ask, is that the only narrative available? And my advocacy is simply that the biblical narrative is a more adequate narrative for the shaping of public reality and for the living our lives, because that narrative has as its key player the God of grace and justice and freedom and faithfulness. Now, that character of the God of love and grace and justice and all that doesn't make any sense in the American narrative or in the narrative of Marx or in the narrative of Freud. You have to take the whole biblical narrative in order for that character to make any sense. The American narrative depends on a very timid, tepid God. It doesn't want a God who is a real player. So we've been theologically busy translating this vigorous covenant God into something else. So what I want to do in my own work is to help people see the profound tension between the American narrative and the covenantal narrative of the Bible that is carried in mixed ways by Judaism and Christianity. And I don't think we've done a good job of tracing out the American narrative in all of its scars and flaws.
So a critique is necessary right now.
I think it's very necessary. I do. But Empire and Neighborhood, or Empire and Covenant, I think that work can make a lot of sense to people. And when we do that, we become aware that almost all of us have one foot in each narrative. So then the practical question comes, well, if you have one foot in each narrative, which foot do you want to put your weight on? And do you want to move your foot over a little, and so on and so on.
Right.
And I think many millennials, those who think critically, they know that American narrative is unconvincing. But that's very hard work. And I think many millennials who may know that do not have any great sense that the biblical narrative of covenant is an actual, lively, adequate alternative.
And what is the biblical covenant idea?
Well, the biblical covenant is that we, meaning Jews, Christians, human beings, we are in a covenant with this God of justice and mercy and freedom and fidelity. And the good life is living out that relationship, which brings with it living out a relationship in and with and for the neighborhood. But it has to do with the recognition that our life basically depends upon a relationship of fidelity. It does not depend on being powerful. It does not depend on being smart. It does not depend on being rich. It depends on a faithful relationship, because we need somebody to hear us.
Wow.
And I think you could say God in the Bible needs somebody to hear God, so that the first word of Jews is Shema. Listen up. Listen up, I have something to say to you.
What do you think God's saying right now to us?
What is God saying to us?
In America now.
I think he's saying it's very late.